Welcome back to my YouTube channel where I have been going over the process I followed in my PhD application cycle. In the previous video, I talked about how I went about identifying my research interests, and I also mentioned that writing my SOP was a very essential part of this process. Now, in this video, I will go deeper into how I went about writing my SOP and what are the different aspects of a statement of purpose. I will also need to specify that in a lot of programs, you do not just submit an SOP, you also submit a personal history statement along with it. Now, some programs just ask for one statement of purpose where you talk about some personal challenges you faced or your personal experiences that inform your current interest or your decision of applying for a PhD. But in some programs, there is a very strict distinction. So they ask for one statement of purpose and they ask for one personal history statement. So it would be important to identify what are these different requirements based on the programs you're applying for so that you are prepared for whatever the requirements are. In this video, I will be talking more specifically about the statement of purpose. And while I'll be mentioning some aspects of the personal history statement, I think I will try to make a different video talking about what a personal history statement is and how you can write it down. So let's get started. So to begin with, I would like to talk a little bit about what a statement of purpose is and why does it matter. If I'm being completely honest, I feel a statement of purpose is one of the most important aspects of your application, and it certainly took me the most time to come up with. And why I say so is that your resume, which is kind of like your profile in 1 or 2 pages, is very limited and very structured. You have to summarize your entire self into 2 pages. So there is not enough scope to, personalize it enough to really communicate who you are as a person. And you could do that in interviews after you get shortlisted, but well, you need to make it through the phase, through that step of getting interview calls. So I think a statement of purpose serves that purpose of communicating about who you are in your own words and making your application a bit more personal, which is why it becomes a very important space and aspect of your application. Admission committee isn't just interested in knowing your achievements and prior research experiences. I think who you are as a person, the kind of thinking and the kind of perspectives you bring to the table are also very important aspects of your entire application. So, which is why a statement of purpose becomes extremely important. Now, I would like to talk about understanding what an SOP really is. Now, SOP can mean different things for different fields. I came to this realization because I read SOPs from different kinds of fields and I realized that the kind of tone and the kind of story that these different fields and their SOPs are looking for can really differ. So I think the very first step of thinking about SOPs is to research on what an SOP looks like for your field. How I did for my field was going to this website called csphdsop.org. I will link it in the descriptions, so feel free to go through it. There are different SOPs for different fields submitted by actual grad students, and my very first step was to read these SOPs. And the idea behind it was to just understand what do different SOPs look like. And also, of course, a very important bit about writing an SOP is that you need to have a very free mind while doing so. So I also acknowledge that reading other people's SOP can really influence your thinking and it could really limit the directions in which you would like to take your SOP. So I was very particular about when I read these SOPs. It was very strictly in the beginning of my process. And when I actually started writing down, I decided to not look at any other SOP because I could feel that reading others' work was really coming in the way of me being able to think more independently. So this is just a line of caution. Just be careful about that. So yeah, I researched about what do different SOPs look like. I also read a lot of these tips that a lot of people have compiled on writing SOPs. And the entire activity was to understand what are the different elements of a good SOP. One additional thing that I did was annotating all these SOPs I found. And this was because I realized every applicant has a different way of writing down an SOP. Because essentially, a statement of purpose is your story, right? You're talking about what your experiences were, how they influenced your current decision, and yeah, you just summarize your entire journey, and it's really about your writing skills. So I would like to believe there is no strong template of how to write a good SOP. It really depends on your creative expression, but of course there are a lot of existing templates out there. If you would like to explore them, you should, for sure. I personally wanted to come up with my way of communicating my story. So annotating all these different SOPs also helped me identify what was this very broad kind of storytelling narrative that a lot of people follow. And while I could not come up with a very specific template, I could see what are the different elements people usually talk about in their statement. So So before drafting my SOP, there were some questions I asked myself. One was, what exactly is my story and why am I here? Why did I decide to pursue a PhD? And these were deep questions. I think I had to sit by myself and reflect a lot. And yes, the entire process of writing a SOP is going to be a very reflective one. You'll have to be very honest with yourself. You'll have to maybe go a little deeper into understanding your own purpose and motivation. And I think only then can you very candidly and honestly communicate your story to the reader. And I feel that authenticity of your story would also be really valuable for your application. So I asked these questions to myself, and the very first thing I did was just write it down, just write my entire story down in very candid words. And I remember it took around like 5 to 6 pages to write this thing down. But, and obviously, you cannot submit an SOP which is 5 to 6 pages long. Most programs have very strict limitations on how much you can write, and it varies from 1,000 words to 1,500 words. So you have to be very careful about the space of your SOP. But even though it was a very long statement, it gave me a very good idea of what my story was, and it also helped me revisit it. Now, my next step was taking aspects of this 5 to 6 page long story and identifying what are the most relevant parts of it into that would be useful for my application, or I would like to talk about in my application. In this process, as I mentioned in my previous video, I also had to identify what my research interest is, because only then could I really put together that narrative of why I'm doing what I'm doing and why does it excite me. So that is kind of like a prerequisite of this stage. And I had to do a lot of iterations, but the broad theme that I arrived to was starting with a very brief introduction of who I am, because that sort of sets a stage of whatever you're going to say next. So my very first, I would say, paragraph of my SOP was talking about who I am and also very briefly talking about my research interests. I think that one paragraph did the job of, as I said, setting that stage and also letting the reader know what I'm going to talk about next. So I did not leave my interest and motivation to the very last paragraph, so that just as you start reading, you already start building that narrative or thinking about who could really work with me and what kind of a profile my story is leading up to. So I started with that. Next, I talked about my different research experiences. Uh, I talked about what all I have done before. And while a lot of people try to categorize it into broader themes, I try to talk about my research experiences in a very story format. I followed the actual chronology in which those experiences happened, because I think that helped me communicate my journey in the best way. Uh, and Also justify why I took a particular project or what I learned from a particular project, and how did those learnings influence my next decisions or my next projects. So I talked about all of my relevant experiences in that story format. Now, one very important aspect of writing an SOP is that it should not just be your resume in more words. It needs to add something more to your profile or to your application. So, aspects like what you learned from a research experience, why was a research experience relevant to you, or your journey, or your current motivation, and also justifying why did you take a particular project, not just uh, writing down the different experiences you have in a very unrelated manner, was important. So basically, you talk about the different projects you've done, but also give your own flavor to what you say. Another important bit is talking about your contributions in each of the projects. So it cannot just be I did XYZ project and this was the outcome of the project and this is what I learned. If you also specify what your contribution is, it's a lot easier to identify what kind of skills you're coming with and what kind of potential contributions you could have in other projects. That being said, the idea behind this entire bit is to just let them know what experience you come with. It does not at all mean that you will have to limit yourself to that skill set in the time to come. So, if you don't want to be limited to that skill set, you should mention in your SOP. You can just write about some things that you've not known before but you'd like to learn before. You could also address some of your weaknesses or limitations. This is also a good space to justify anything that you think could be weaker in your application, maybe your CGPA or a particular component of your performance. So, yeah, just talking about your story and your personal interest in more detail. The next aspect I talked about was my research interest. As I mentioned, I introduced it briefly in the first paragraph. Now I went a bit deeper into it, talking about the kind of questions I would like to explore, the kind of research methods I already come with and would like to get deeper into, or the kind of research methods I would like to expand into. This was a good paragraph to just state explicitly what I want to do in my PhD, what is this area of interest that excites me. And as I mentioned in my previous video, this would be very essential in letting the admin committee know what kind of faculty could potentially work with you and who they could match you up with. So this was like the second last paragraph of my application. And then lastly, I talked about why am I applying to this school or to this program. This required me to go deeper into these programs and learn more about their culture, their values, or the kind of research they have been doing. I think traditionally, this is also the space where you talk about which faculty you would like to potentially work with and why. So, this is where researching about which faculty excites you or what kind of research excites you becomes important, because you will have to list down 2 3 people from each school or each program that you would like to work with in the future, and also delve a bit deeper into their existing research so you could connect your interest to their interest. And yeah, I also briefly talked about what I would like to do after my PhD. This was a personal decision because I think that way, again, they would know more about me and my future plans too. So, this was broadly the template I followed, and it wasn't an easy template to come up with. You might see similar templates already being present in other people's SOPs, but for me, I really struggled in finding the right tone and the right balance of what I write in my SOP. And I would like to mention that it took me 30 or more than 30 iterations to reach to the final SOP that I submitted. Now, the number is not there to intimidate you, it's just to share that it's really not that straightforward to write an SOP, or at least it was not for me. Uh, these 30 iterations were improved by the kind of feedback I got from my advisors or my peers or grad students I was connected to, or grad students I got to know through grad programs, feedback programs. So, and my final SOP was very different from the first SOP. So, yes, it will take time to write an SOP, and I would really suggest getting started as soon as possible, as soon as you know what you want to write about, and not wait till the right moment, because trust me, it's tough to write and it's very easy to procrastinate. So, I would suggest to just write something, just begin somewhere, and then you can perfect it over time. It doesn't need to be perfect in the beginning itself. That being said, I also want to mention that an SOP is a very personal thing. So it's not that you need to follow a particular process or a particular template. Whatever I have said till now is just what worked for me. Um, it could be very different for you. And why I say that is because, for example, I think I really value the more personal aspects of my journey, or some emotional aspects of my journey. And I did not want my SOP to just be a list of experiences and some a very mechanical sounding story. I wanted to let the admission committee know who I am as a person while also talking about my experiences. So finding that right tone where I'm not way too personal, but also not extremely mechanical and just, similar to an expanded version of my resume was challenging for me. And also giving a narrative to my story was challenging, which is where I whiteboarded a lot, and I tried to uh, visualize my story, um, through, while by penning it down or just putting together that narrative in my head. So I had to spend a lot of time into that. If this is something that comes easily to you, amazing. And if this is something that you do not want to do and you do not want it to be very personal, that's great too. But what's important is that you need to know what your SOP should be or how you want it to be. And that might take time, which is why I would suggest again to start whenever you can, because this is going to be a long process, but also it's going to be very rewarding. You will get to sit with yourself, you would get to reflect a lot, you would get to learn a lot about your own interests, about your field, and I think by the end of it, you would be very strong and confident about your own purpose. So if you reach to that stage, I think that's really important as a researcher. So yeah, in this video I talked about how I wrote my SOP. I will also put together a video on the personal history statement, which is usually also asked for by departments under the same narrative of your statement. So I hope you learned something through this video, and I wish you all the best for writing your SOP, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.